Judi Dench has always been more than an actress. At 61, when most women in her profession were told their best years were behind them, she stepped into the Bond franchise and rewrote the rules. At 64, she needed only 8 minutes on screen to win an Oscar. And yet today, at 90, the woman who once commanded entire theaters with a glance now admits she can no longer walk alone without fear of falling, no longer read the scripts that once defined her life. Her triumphs are unforgettable, but so are her wounds. The fire that erased decades of memories, the Friday roses that stopped when her husband Michael died, the illness that has stolen her sight line by line. For the world she is a legend, for her family she is a grandmother clinging to laughter in the shadows. So what does goodbye mean for Judi Dench? Why does her story at 90 strike harder than any role she ever played? And what truth is left when even the greatest stage light begins to fade? When Judi Dench first walked onto the stage of the Old Vic in 1957, she carried with her the weight of years spent in shadows. She was cast as Ophelia in Hamlet, a role of fragility, dissent, and ruin. For many, it was simply another performance in a long-running tradition. For Judi, it was the release of a lifetime of restraint. Every pause carried history. Every glance seemed to bleed. Critics did not write that she played Ophelia. They wrote that she became her. In that single moment, the conversation around Judi Dench changed forever. No longer too plain, no longer dismissed as unsuited for screen or stage, she was undeniable. Her path led directly to the Royal Shakespeare Company, where she transformed from rising actress to the embodiment of Shakespeare's women. Juliet's innocence, Titania's mischief, Lady Macbeth's terrifying ambition, each figure gained new life through Judi's hands. She was not wearing costumes, she was carrying storms. Audiences left theaters shaken, not only because of the words they had heard for centuries, but because Judi had found a way to make those words feel lived. A line did not sound rehearsed. It sounded as if it had been dragged up from the bottom of her soul. For decades, the Royal Shakespeare Company became her proving ground. This was not a glamorous ascent. It was a relentless one. She studied, she delivered, she defied every label attached to her. Others came to the stage with confidence. Judi came with scars, and that made her work unforgettable. Professors who once doubted her face now studied her precision. Audiences who came to watch Shakespeare's characters left speaking only about Judi. She was not a starlet. She was a force. And yet, for all the acclaim that came from theater, the wider world still had not truly seen her. Television and film were ruthless toward older actresses, and Judi was already moving past the age when casting directors looked elsewhere. It seemed as though her future would remain bound to the stage, limited by the same walls where she had once triumphed. But even in that uncertainty, Judi was rewriting her own story. She never accepted the industry's timetable. She never allowed the silence of rejection to return. Every production she undertook in those years deepened her craft, sharpened her timing, and strengthened her resilience. Audiences saw a woman embodying queens, warriors and dreamers with equal fire. What they could not see was the determination underneath, the insistence that her best years were not behind her, but still waiting. That determination created a paradox. By the time most actresses would have considered stepping back, Judi was unknowingly preparing for the role that would break her onto the global stage. Her Shakespeare years had built an arsenal, the authority to command, the subtlety to devastate with silence, and the courage to confront doubt head-on. She was not just rehearsing Shakespeare. She was rehearsing for a larger fight, the battle to prove that brilliance does not fade with time but sharpens with it. And that battle was about to reach the widest audience in her career. In the mid-1990s, a franchise in need of reinvention came calling. James Bond required something new, and Judi Dench was ready to deliver it. By the mid-1990s, James Bond had grown stale. Audiences still turned up for the action, but the franchise itself felt trapped in another era. Then came a decision that stunned even longtime fans. For the first time, Bond's superior, the head of MI6, would be played by a woman. It was a bold gamble, and the choice was Judi Dench. She was 61. In an industry where women over 40 were told they no longer mattered, Judi walked into one of the most masculine film franchises of all time and rewrote its very structure. Her M was not background authority. She was the center of conscience, the voice that could stop Bond cold with a single line. From GoldenEye onward, Judi's presence reframed the entire series. She wasn't simply filling a role, she was redefining power. Across 7 films, her character became Bond's fiercest critic, and only true equal. She exposed his arrogance, challenged his decisions, and revealed the vulnerability behind his myth. The relationship was not romantic. It was something rarer, respect forged through conflict. When M died in Skyfall, held in Bond's arms, the audience wept as though they had lost Judi herself. It was not just the death of a character, it was the end of an era she had created from nothing. And yet Bond was not the only stage where she shook the world. In 1998, she appeared in Shakespeare in Love. Her role lasted only 8 minutes, barely the length of a song. But in those 8 minutes as Queen Elizabeth I, she commanded the entire film. Every look was steel, every pause a command, every word a crown. Critics called it magic. The Academy called it an Oscar. The truth was simpler. Judi had distilled a lifetime of craft into moments so sharp they cut through time itself. From that point, she was no longer a national treasure confined to theater. She was an international icon. Mrs. Brown revealed a Queen Victoria shattered by grief yet unbroken. Philomena broke hearts with the quiet desperation of a mother searching for a lost son. The Best Exotic Marigold Hotel and Victoria and Abdul proved again that age did not dim her light, it refined it. Awards followed in waves: BAFTAs, Golden Globes, Olivier statues, and of course the Oscar. But for Judi, the trophies were never the prize. The real victory was the way she dismantled the cruelest illusion in her industry, that women past 60 were invisible. She became living proof that brilliance does not age out, that wisdom and humor can strike harder than beauty ever could. Her work in this era also changed what audiences expected of cinema. They no longer saw her as a performer stepping into roles. They saw her as truth itself. Whether she was wearing a crown, a cardigan, or an MI6 badge, she forced critics and fans alike to admit that greatness is not measured in screen time but in what you do with it. And yet, just as her international fame reached its peak, life off-stage prepared a blow that no applause could soften. She had won the respect of Hollywood. She had rewritten the rules for women in film, but away from the cameras, flames were about to erase the most private pieces of her past. In 1993, at 59 years old, Judi Dench was still ascending, still claiming new ground in her career. Then, in a single night, fire took nearly everything. The blaze began in her Hampstead home, a 3-story sanctuary, where decades of life with her husband Michael Williams and their daughter Finty had been carefully threaded into every corner. Within hours, flames consumed it all. Scripts that bore the ink of her early triumphs, photographs softened by years of touch, letters folded and unfolded in private devotion. Even the roses Michael had pressed into albums, one for every Friday of their marriage, turned to ash. For Judi, it was not the loss of possessions. It was the theft of memory itself. The house had been more than walls. It was the record of a shared life, the vessel of laughter, arguments, and comfort. Watching it vanish was like watching time itself erased. To the public, she remained composed. Dame Judi Dench, untouchable on stage, steady on screen. But privately, she admitted, it felt as though her entire history had been stripped bare. Rebuilding the structure could be done. Rebuilding what had once lived inside those walls was impossible. The scent of paper browned by age, the small gestures written in ink and preserved across decades, those details were gone forever. And still, she endured. She chose to rise from the ashes not by pretending it didn't matter, but by facing the silence it left behind. That silence became another scar, another weight that deepened her craft. Audiences who saw her in the years following could not name what had changed, but they felt it. A pause in her delivery now seemed to hold echoes. A glance carried absence as much as presence. She was acting, yes, but she was also carrying the burden of erasure, turning it into something that audiences could feel in their bones. The fire had taken her past. Soon she would discover that fate had prepared a crueler trial, one that would steal from her heart itself. Because even as she steadied herself from the wreckage of her home, Michael Williams was by her side. He was her anchor, her laughter, the man who handed her a single rose every Friday without fail. For more than 30 years, that rhythm had been the heartbeat of their marriage. By the end of the decade, that rhythm faltered. Michael was diagnosed with lung cancer, and just as the Hampstead fire had shown her how quickly a lifetime of memory could be erased, his illness would show her how fragile even the strongest love could be. For more than 3 decades, Judi Dench's life was measured not in roles or awards, but in roses. Every Friday, without fail, Michael Williams placed a single red bloom in her hand. No headlines covered it, no applause followed it. Yet that quiet ritual became the heartbeat of their marriage. It was devotion marked not by grand gestures, but by consistency, by the steady rhythm of love renewed week after week. Michael was not only her husband, he was her partner on stage, a respected actor in his own right, and the anchor who steadied Judi through years of rejection and triumph. Their laughter filled the Hampstead home. Their daughter Finty grew within its walls, and the roses became a promise that neither time nor distance could shake. For Judi, fame was fleeting, but Michael's presence was permanent. That permanence shattered in 2001. Michael was diagnosed with lung cancer, a legacy of earlier years spent smoking. The illness descended quickly, stripping him of strength, of breath, of time. Judi was working in New York when the call came. Michael was slipping away. She rushed to the airport, frantic, but flights were delayed, cancellations piled up. In those hours she later described as the most helpless of her life. She was suspended between 2 continents, knowing that the man who had carried her heart for decades might be gone before she reached him. She did make it home. She was there for his final days, and when the end came she whispered, almost cautiously, that it was very, very good to be with him. Yet even as she said it, the word good felt unbearably fragile. Because when Michael passed in January of that year, at just 65, Judi's world collapsed into silence. The Friday roses stopped arriving. The rhythm was broken. Their daughter Finty, then in her late 20s, tried to hold her mother through the storm. But even a daughter's love could not fill the void Michael left behind. The house in Hampstead, once rebuilt after the fire, now felt colder, emptier, its rooms echoing with absence. To millions, she was Dame Judi Dench, untouchable, immortal, a national treasure. To herself, she was a widow clutching air where presence had been. Grief could have consumed her completely. Instead, she threw herself back into work almost immediately, returning to set the day after his funeral. She later admitted it was not out of strength, but survival. "I had to," she said. "Otherwise I would have fallen apart." The public saw resilience, professionalism. What they did not see was a woman using her craft as a lifeline, speaking lines on screen while clinging to them off-screen. Her performances in those years carried a new ache. Iris, The Shipping News, films born in the shadow of Michael's absence, seemed to bleed with wounds no acting class could ever teach. She was not playing characters grieving. She was grieving, and audiences felt it. Judi never remarried. She never sought to replace him. When asked, she simply said, "Michael is still here," and perhaps he was. She still lives in the house they once built together. Sometimes she swears she sees a curtain stir when no wind moves, or hears silence shift, as though he has answered her. Their love, like the roses, may have withered in the physical world, but in memory it remains eternal, both a comfort and a torment. But even as she endured the fire and the loss of Michael, fate was not finished testing her. The deepest wound was still to come, not from the outside world, but from her own body, which began to betray the very senses that had carried her brilliance across 6 decades. In 2012, Judi Dench sat across from doctors who delivered a verdict she could not ignore: age-related macular degeneration, one eye dry, the other wet. For most it was an inconvenience of age, a gradual dimming. For Judi, it was devastation. Her art had been built on precision, on reading lines, studying scripts, dissecting words until they bled with meaning. Now letters blurred, sentences dissolved, and whole pages vanished into fog. What had once been her private joy, sitting with a script in silence, building a character line by line, was suddenly beyond reach. She admitted it quietly. "I can't see on my own anymore. I can't read. I can't write." The words were steady, but beneath them sat a grief that could not be disguised. Friends and colleagues began reading scripts aloud to her. Cues were whispered on sets. Stagehands guided her steps. To audiences she remained magnificent. To Judi each performance became a battle. The public thought they were watching mastery. In truth, they were witnessing resilience. The struggle did not end with her eyes. A year later, pain in her knees forced surgery and replacement. For a woman who had once strode across stages as queens and warriors, the humbling act of relearning how to walk was another reminder of time's cruelty. Unlike her vision, her knees could heal. She fought through therapy step by step. But deep down she knew bones could be mended. The shadows before her eyes would never retreat. By the mid-2020s, denial was no longer possible. Judi admitted what the world had already suspected. Her eyesight was almost gone. She learned her lines like poems, clinging to rhythm where vision failed. Still, she refused to stop. Even when humiliation struck, walking into furniture, losing balance in public, feeling independence slip through her hands, she pressed forward. "I can't go out by myself anymore. I will walk into something, or fall over." That confession, stripped of pride, echoed the universal fear of aging, not death, but dependence. And then, as though blindness were not enough, hearing began to fade. "I don't feel young anymore now that I can't see. And my hearing is going too." The words were simple, but the impact was crushing. Sight dimming, sound vanishing. The very senses that had made her immortal now retreating one by one. Through it all, she clung to anchors. Her daughter Finty stood by her side. Her grandson Sam filled the silence with laughter. And in those moments Judi swore she could hear Michael again, just for a heartbeat, echoing in her grandson's voice. Her parrot, Sweetie, teased her with mischief. And in quiet companionship, David Mills, not a replacement for Michael, but a presence that warmed the spaces loneliness threatened to claim, shared meals and swims, reminding her that life still held softness. She also planted trees for the friends she lost: Ian Holm, Alan Rickman, Richard Bryars, Maggie Smith, creating a woodland of memory where every trunk carried a soul she had once loved. "When I walk there," she said, "I feel as though I'm speaking to them." It was beautiful and unbearably sad. And yet, Judi never surrendered to despair. She embraced wrinkles as stories, carved carpe diem into her wrist as a permanent command, and used her name to fight for others through causes and charities. Even as her own sight faded, she became a patron for the Macular Degeneration Trust, determined that others would not face the same struggle alone. Theater is built on sight, sound, presence, and so it is theater's cruelest irony that Judi Dench must endure life without the very senses that made her legendary. But still, she stands. Not as the actress who once commanded Shakespeare or Bond, but as proof that defiance can outlast even the sharpest decline. Because for Judi Dench, goodbye is not surrender, it is survival. And survival for her has always been performance at its most human. Now at 90, Judi Dench no longer stands beneath stage lights but beneath the gentler light of her Surrey home, a centuries-old haven where memory clings to every stone. Her days have slowed into quieter rhythms. She tends her garden, molds clay with her hands, sketches shapes even when the lines blur, and plays word games that challenge her mind when her eyes cannot. In the background, her parrot Sweetie chirps with cheeky mischief, a daily reminder that even in frailty, laughter can still intrude. Family remains her anchor. Her daughter Finty has walked with her through storms, while her grandson Sam has given her something far rarer than applause: continuity. When Sam laughs, Judi closes her eyes and swears she hears Michael again. For just a heartbeat, the voice she lost more than 20 years ago returns through another generation, echoing in sound and memory. In that fleeting moment, grief softens, not because it fades, but because it transforms. She once dreamed of a larger family, even considered adoption. That dream never materialized, and she has carried that silence alongside all her other wounds. Yet what she built with Michael, and now holds with Finty and Sam, remains enough to tether her to the present. She did not replace Michael, nor did she want to. With David Mills, a conservationist whose devotion to nature mirrors her own, she found companionship. Meals, swims, shared conversations, small comforts that keep loneliness at bay. But the Friday rose, the rhythm of devotion that defined her marriage, remains untouched. It cannot be repeated. Her circle has grown smaller. She has said goodbye to so many who once filled her stages: Ian Holm, Alan Rickman, Richard Briers, and Maggie Smith. To remember them, she planted trees in her woodland of memory. When I walk there, she said, I feel as though I'm speaking to them. That woodland is both tribute and reminder, a place of presence and absence, where the silence of aging speaks louder than applause ever could. And yet Judi has chosen defiance at every turn. She refused cosmetic surgery, wearing her wrinkles as maps of a life fully lived. She tattooed Carpe Diem on her wrist, a permanent reminder to seize every fleeting day. She became patron of the Macular Degeneration Trust, turning her private battle into public service. In doing so, she gave her struggle purpose beyond herself. So what does goodbye mean for Judi Dench? Not retreat, not surrender. It means acknowledging the shadows while still choosing light. It means facing silence but still insisting on laughter. It means knowing that the roses may no longer arrive, but carrying their fragrance in memory. Her life has been measured in roles, in ovations, in trophies. But the true measure is endurance, the way she transformed rejection into fire, grief into craft, blindness into resilience. She has taught audiences that greatness is not bound to youth, that truth does not vanish with age, that love can outlive loss. For Judi Dench, the curtain has not fallen, it has only shifted. What remains is not absence but essence, a presence that will never fade from the stage of memory. She stands, as she always has, in defiance of silence. And in that defiance, she reminds us that the truest kind of performance is not what happens under the lights, but what endures long after they dim. For more emotional stories, check out this video.